What's up, YouTube? Jeff, your Style O.G. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to layer those clothes. If you're new to the channel, we release a new video every day at 4 p.m. Eastern discussing various men's lifestyle topics such as style, grooming, and dating. I invite you to subscribe and tap that notification bell and join us. And to my returning friends like Bar Shalom, salute. Now, layering your clothes year-round, especially the fall, spring, and winter, is one of the greatest stylish but functional moves you can make. It's a great way to stay warm, cool off, and do it in a stylish way. But there are small details you need to pay attention to that you pull it off right. So in today's video, I've got 10 or so tips to help you layer properly, stylishly, and functionally. Gonna run through them pretty quickly, just as a reference guide to make sure you're layering the right way. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10 tips on how to layer your clothes stylishly and properly. Tip number 1, you wanna make sure each layer works just as well individually as it does as part of a group. Here's the thing with layering. Throughout the day, you may add or subtract layers as you're going along, depending on the temperature. If you take 1 or 2 off, you gotta make sure the bottom layer looks good, and when you throw other layers on, you wanna make sure the top layers work as well. Especially during transitional seasons, you never know when you're gonna have to add or remove. So make sure each layer works just as well on its own as it does as part of the group. Next up, you wanna layer from thin to thick, meaning the thinnest layer being closer to your body and add thickness as you work your way out. This is done for 2 purposes. 1, it makes it much easier to regulate your temperature. As the temperature rises, you take those thicker layers off. As it gets colder, you add thicker layers. On top of that, layering from thin to thick gives a great sense of visual depth when somebody is visualizing you. Say for example, you might start with an undershirt, then maybe an Oxford button down, you got your nice sweater, and maybe a jacket over that. Thin to thick. Speaking of thin to thick layers, brings us to our 3rd layering tip, and one I think guys don't utilize nearly enough. That's to make sure you're wearing an undershirt under those layers. Now, the undershirt has great functional use that a lot of guys are missing out on. 1, it helps you keep you much cooler. It wicks away moisture. It's not a t-shirt. It's made of a thinner, clingier material that's maybe synthetic and just cooler than a t-shirt. Top of that, it's gonna save a lot of sweat stains on your great shirts. In fact, I made a whole video on why you should be wearing an undershirt. Check that out here. But if you wanna start thin and thick and do this layering thing right, utilize undershirts much more. Next up, we gotta refer back to the most important style rule of all, and it's just as important, if not more so, when it comes to layering. That fit is king. And how that comes in with layering, you wanna make sure each individual layer fits you very well. You may be adding and subtracting layers as you go throughout the day. You don't wanna have an ill-fitting shirt on if you get too hot and take that jacket off. You never know when you're gonna have to reveal another layer. If you take that jacket off and you have an ill-fitting shirt, ill-fitting sweater underneath, throws off the whole look. Remember, with layering, each individual piece has to work just as well by itself as it does as part of the ensemble. That's why making sure each individual piece fits extremely well is just as important when layering. Which brings us to our next layering tip. And I gotta admit, once in a while, I break this rule, and it's not a good rule to break. You wanna make sure that your longer layers are on the outside. What I mean by that, you don't wanna have a t-shirt peeking out below your sweater or things of that nature. A lot of times when we're just casually throwing on layers, a lot of times the underneath layer can peek out below. The hem is a little longer than the outside layer. That can come off as sloppy and not well put together. Now, every once in a while, I still will break this rule, and you can too. They're just style rules. But as a general rule, make sure the hem of the outside layers are longer than the hem of your inside layer. Our next layering tip has to do with properly layering your colors. Now, here's where it's easy to mess up. You don't want to be throwing on contrasting colors. And us fellas, we're not the best when it comes to matching colors. So I advise you to take it the conservative route. You want to grab colors that easily complement each other. I'm thinking about your blacks, your whites, and your grays. Stick to those. And another great tip, stay tonal. Whether it's monochromatic, a lot of the same colors, or different tones of the same color is a great way to layer your colors without making a mistake. So when it comes to layering your colors, keep it simple. Don't try to be too far out there. Unless you got some advanced style moves, then go for it. But the best way, keep those colors complementary. Speaking of layering with colors, let's talk a little bit about those bright colors. Now I need you to be careful. Please, no more than 1 or 2 bright colors in that layering outfit. For one, it's much easier to make a mistake when you have all these different popping colors. And the point of having a bright color is that one piece or 2 would draw a lot of attention. When you pick too many bright colors in your outfit, a person's eye doesn't know where to go to, and it kind of defeats the purpose. So a great rule to stick by, especially if you're wearing bright colors, please, no more than 1 or 2 bright colors in that layering outfit. However, if you want to try something to add a little bit of personality to that look, I suggest you alternate solid colors with patterns. That's a great way to layer. Whether you're talking about a nice solid shirt with a nice patterned jacket or sweater, a great way to add a little contrast between your outfit and your layers without going too crazy. So say you throw on a nice white shirt, a patterned sweater, and maybe a solid jacket on top of that. Alternate your solids and your patterns, a great layering move. Speaking of layering patterns brings us to our next layering tip, and that's knowing how to layer more than one pattern in an outfit. Now this is something a lot of guys get wrong, and here's what I suggest. You want to go from lightest to strongest or strongest to lightest. Here's what I mean. Say you have a great statement piece on the outside, maybe a nice window pane or a strong plaid or tweed. As you go inside, make the patterns a little more subdued. Make the next layer underneath not as strong as a statement, and maybe the further innermost layer might be solid. Or you can do it the other way around. If you have a solid layer on the outside, add a little pattern as you go in. But remember, the key when layering more and more patterns, go from lightest to strongest or strongest to lightest. And last but certainly not least on my list of the 10 top tips with layering clothes, that's to make sure you know the function and practicality of each layer you're throwing on. Now remember, layering is just not a style move, it's also a functional move as well. For example, like what we talked about earlier, why are you throwing on that undershirt? To protect your shirt, to wick away moisture, that's the function of that layer. Whereas of course a sweater or a jacket may be for to provide more warmth. Or you might have a layer you're throwing on just for a pop of color or personality. But the bottom line is, make sure you know why you're throwing on each layer. Like I said earlier, each piece should work just as well on its own as it does as part of the group, and you want another function of each layer you're throwing on. Okay, so there you have it, my top 10 tips on how to layer those clothes properly and stylishly. Let us know in the comment section if you have some great layering tips and some of your favorite layering outfits and pieces. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, hit that like button. Helps the channel to grow. And of course, tap the notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos we release every day at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'll check you out tomorrow.